Everyone thought she was just a quiet cook who came to work and leave without a trace, but the shy rancher felt something strange the moment she stepped onto his land, tall and calm, with eyes that seemed to carry stories she never spoke aloud. And during that first week, he tried to ignore the changes, telling himself it was only food, only routine, only coincidence. Yet the silence in his house no longer felt empty, and the nights felt heavier on his chest, as if memories he had locked away were waking up. And each day her presence grew deeper, not louder, not obvious, but powerful in a way he could not explain, until one evening he realized his heart was racing for no clear reason, his thoughts restless, his past pressing closer than ever before. And that was when fear mixed with curiosity, because he understood something was happening to him, something he never asked for, something he could not control. And 1 week later, when she finally acted, the truth hit him so hard that his life would never return to what it was before. He was a shy rancher who lived alone on a wide and silent stretch of land where the wind spoke more than people ever did. And every morning he woke before sunrise to work with no one to greet him, and no voice to answer his own. As days passed, the loneliness settled deeper into his routine, shaping his habits, his thoughts, and the quiet way he moved through life. He rarely visited town and avoided conversations because words felt heavy when unused for too long. The ranch gave him purpose but not comfort, and at night the empty house reminded him how long it had been since anyone cared. If he returned home safe, he told himself he only needed help with cooking and daily chores. Yet deep inside, he longed for something warmer than food, something human, something that could break the cold silence that followed him from room to room. Without realizing it, his heart was waiting for a change he never expected to arrive. Without realizing how deeply he needed it, the rancher decided to hire help, and that decision quietly opened the door to something unfamiliar, because on the morning she arrived, the air around the ranch felt different, not louder or brighter, but heavier with a calm tension he could not explain. She stepped down from the truck slowly, tall and steady, her presence grounded like the land itself, and she introduced herself in a soft voice that carried confidence without pride. He noticed how she met his eyes without hesitation, and then looked away with respect, as if she understood boundaries better than he did. From that moment, the silence between them was not empty but watchful. She began working without asking many questions, learning the rhythm of the ranch faster than he expected. Her movements were quiet yet purposeful, and even when she cooked, she treated each task with care, as if feeding the house rather than just a man. The meals were simple but carried warmth he had not felt in years, and while he ate, he felt memories stir that he had long buried under routine and distance. He tried to tell himself that nothing had changed, that she was only an employee. But each day, her presence settled deeper into the walls of the house. The rancher found himself listening for her footsteps, noticing how the rooms no longer echoed as sharply, and at night, when lamps were dim, he sensed a strange comfort mixed with unease, because her silence was not the same as his. Hers felt chosen, shaped by experience rather than fear. Sometimes he caught her standing outside at dusk, looking toward the horizon, as if waiting for something unseen, and when he asked if she needed anything, she only smiled faintly and said she was fine. Yet that smile carried weight, as though it hid a long road behind it. The rancher began sleeping less, not from worry but from awareness, his thoughts circling questions he never asked aloud. Who was she before this place? Why did she feel familiar in a way he could not name? And why did his chest tighten when he imagined her leaving? Each morning he noticed small changes. The house was cleaner, the animals calmer, even his own hands felt steadier. But with these changes came an emotional pull he did not understand. Her kindness was quiet and deliberate, never crossing lines, yet it reached him more deeply than loud gestures ever could. She listened when he spoke, truly listened, and that alone unsettled him, because no one had done that in years. Sometimes their eyes met across the kitchen, and in those moments he sensed a shared understanding, as if both carried loneliness shaped by different storms. He wondered if she saw his past written in the way he avoided mirrors and conversations, and he feared that She might, because being seen felt more dangerous than being alone, yet part of him wanted her to know, wanted someone to notice the man behind the silence. As the days moved forward, the rancher realized that hiring her had not just filled a role, it had shifted the balance of his world, and though nothing dramatic had happened yet, a quiet tension grew with each passing hour. Like the slow tightening of a knot, he could feel that something was building beneath the calm surface, something that would not stay hidden for long, and without knowing why, he sensed that her arrival was not coincidence, but the beginning of a moment his life had been moving toward without his consent. That feeling of something quietly building did not fade with time, but instead pressed closer into his daily life, because subtle changes began appearing that he could neither ignore nor explain. Mornings felt different when he woke, as if the ranch itself was listening, and he noticed that she woke before him, already moving through the house with steady purpose, leaving behind a sense of order that felt almost intentional. The coffee was ready without being asked. The animals were calmer when she passed by, and even the restless wind seemed to soften when she stood outside. Yet what unsettled him most was how his own thoughts began shifting. He found himself remembering moments from long ago, fragments of conversations, feelings of loss he believed had faded, and these memories surfaced without pain but with a quiet ache that stayed with him throughout the day. He wondered if she noticed the way he lingered near the doorway while she cooked, pretending to fix something just to remain close, and when she spoke, her words were few yet meaningful, never wasting sound, always choosing silence when it carried more weight. There were moments when he caught her looking at him, not with curiosity or judgment, but with recognition, as if she understood his solitude without needing explanation, and that understanding unsettled him deeply because it made him feel exposed. Rancher began questioning his own reactions, asking himself why her presence mattered so much, why the idea of her leaving caused an unfamiliar tightness in his chest, and why nights now felt heavier instead of empty, as if anticipation had replaced loneliness. One evening, he noticed a small object placed carefully on the table, something she had repaired without mentioning, and that simple act struck him harder than grand gestures ever could, because it showed attention, care, and an awareness of his world. He thanked her quietly, and she nodded, meeting his eyes for just a second longer than usual, and in that pause, a current passed between them that neither acknowledged. Days continued like this, filled with unspoken exchanges and growing emotional weight, and he realized that ranch no longer felt like a refuge from people, but a place where connection was slowly unfolding, though fear remained close, because connection meant vulnerability, and vulnerability carried risk. Sometimes at dusk he watched her from a distance as she stood near the fence, her posture strong yet reflective, and he sensed that her silence was layered with experiences he could never fully understand, yet he felt drawn to it, drawn to the strength shaped by hardship rather than comfort, and this pull frightened him because it awakened parts of himself he had long kept buried. He began sleeping lightly, not from worry but from awareness, every sound sharper, every thought clearer, and he noticed that his routine revolved subtly around her presence. Meals tasted different, work felt shared even when done alone, and the house no longer echoed the same way. However, with these changes came a quiet tension, moments when he felt she was holding something back, when her gaze lingered on the horizon a little too long, when her smile faded too quickly, and he wondered what story lay behind her calm exterior. One night he heard her moving through the house long after the lamps were dimmed, and instead of feeling disturbed, he felt comforted, knowing he was not alone in the dark. Yet that comfort was paired with uncertainty, because he sensed that whatever was growing between them was leading somewhere unavoidable, something neither of them had planned, and though no words were spoken, a shared awareness settled in the space they occupied, as if both felt the same shift, but waited for the other to acknowledge it. The rancher realized that the quiet changes were not just around him, but within him. His guarded heart was slowly opening without permission, and while part of him resisted, another part leaned into the unknown, understanding that whatever lay ahead would alter the course of his life in ways he could not yet imagine. That awareness grew heavier with each passing hour until it began shaping his emotions in ways he could no longer dismiss, because her presence was no longer just part of the ranch, but part of his inner world, and he found himself feeling things he had avoided for years, emotions that surfaced quietly yet firmly, like water rising beneath thin ice. He noticed how his chest tightened when she seemed distant, and how relief washed over him when she spoke his name, even softly, and this confusion unsettled him more than loneliness ever had, because loneliness was familiar while this was not. Her kindness felt deliberate yet restrained, as if she offered only what he was ready to receive, and that restraint made every small gesture feel meaningful, a shared glance, a pause in conversation, a moment of silence that spoke louder than words. He began questioning his own reactions late at night, staring at the ceiling while memories drifted back, moments of loss, regret, choices shaped by fear, and he realized that her presence was not creating these emotions but revealing them, bringing to the surface what had always been there, waiting. During the day he worked harder than usual, pushing himself as if effort could quiet his thoughts, yet every task carried her presence with it. He wondered what she thought of him, whether she saw weakness or strength in his silence, and that uncertainty stayed with him, sharpening his awareness. Sometimes she would speak about small things, the weather, the animals, the land, but her tone carried depth, as if every word held meaning beyond sound, and when she listened fully, not interrupting, not judging, simply absorbing, and that made him feel seen in a way that stirred both comfort and fear, because being seen meant being known, and being known meant losing control over the careful distance he had built around himself. He noticed moments when her expression shifted, a brief shadow crossing her eyes when certain topics surfaced, and he sensed pain there, quiet and controlled, never seeking attention, and that pain resonated with his own, creating a silent bond neither acknowledged. As days turned into evenings, the rancher felt a growing tension between wanting to protect his solitude and wanting to step beyond it, because she represented a bridge between isolation and connection, and crossing that bridge meant risk. He feared that attachment would lead to loss, yet resisting it felt equally painful. One afternoon he caught himself smiling at a simple sound, her laughter, soft and brief, and that moment startled him, because it reminded him of a version of himself he thought no longer existed, someone capable of warmth without fear. That realization unsettled him deeply, forcing him to confront the walls he had built. He sensed that she was aware of this shift, not through words but through subtle changes, the way she gave him space when needed and closeness when he faltered, as if she understood his struggle intuitively, and that understanding made his emotions intensify, because it felt rare and fragile, something that could easily break if mishandled. Night grew heavier with anticipation rather than emptiness, and he found himself listening for her movements, not out of habit, but out of reassurance, knowing someone else shared the space. Yet he also felt a growing fear that something would disrupt this fragile balance, because moments like these never lasted forever. He sensed an approaching shift, something unspoken building beneath the surface, and this anticipation filled him with both hope and dread. He began wondering if she would reveal more of herself, or if she would remain guarded, and whether he was ready to face whatever truth lay behind her calm exterior. The emotional weight of these questions pressed on him, making every interaction feel charged, and though nothing dramatic had happened yet, he understood that calm was temporary, a pause before something deeper emerged, because emotions once awakened do not return quietly to sleep. And as he stood one evening watching the sun fade behind the horizon, he felt a certainty settle in his chest, that whatever was unfolding between them was moving toward a moment of truth, one that would demand honesty, courage, and a willingness to face pain as well as possibility. And while he did not know what form that moment would take, he knew his life was already changing in ways he could not reverse, and that realization marked the beginning of a path he could no longer avoid. That certainty followed him into the next days until the week reached its quiet end, and on the seventh evening the ranch felt unusually still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He noticed that she moved more slowly that day, thoughtful rather than distant, and when the sun lowered she asked him to sit at the table, her voice steady yet weighted with intention. He sensed that this was the moment he had been anticipating without knowing why, and as he took his seat his heart beat louder than the surrounding silence. She placed a simple meal before him, but did not sit right away. Instead she stood near the window, looking outward as though gathering strength. When she finally spoke, her words were calm yet carried emotional depth that reached him immediately. She told him she had not come only for work, that this place held meaning she never expected to face again, and hearing this made his chest tighten, because he realized she had been carrying a purpose beyond daily routine. She explained that long ago someone connected to her past had lived on land nearby, and coming here had reopened memories she believed were settled. Yet instead of pain, she found clarity, because in his quiet presence she saw a reflection of her own journey through solitude. The rancher listened without interrupting, aware that this moment demanded honesty rather than comfort. She turned toward him then and met his eyes fully, no longer guarded, and said that watching him live with unspoken emotion had reminded her of how easily people hide from connection to avoid loss. Those words struck him deeply because they described his life with painful accuracy. She did not accuse or pressure him. She simply spoke truth, and that truth felt heavier than any confrontation. She told him that her action that week was not dramatic by design, because she believed real change happens quietly, through awareness rather than force, and her choice to speak now was her way of respecting him, giving him the chance to decide whether he would continue hiding or step forward. The rancher felt overwhelmed, not by her words, but by the realization that someone had seen him clearly and still chosen to stay. He understood then that her presence had not been coincidence, but timing shaped by readiness, and that frightened him because it meant responsibility. He was no longer alone by default, but by choice, and that choice was now before him. His thoughts raced as he faced the truth that connection requires courage, that warmth demands vulnerability, and that avoiding pain also avoids growth. She waited silently, allowing him space, her posture calm, respectful, never demanding a response, and that patience moved him more than anything else, because it showed trust. Finally he spoke, his voice low but steady, admitting that he had built his life around safety rather than fulfillment, that silence had become easier than risk, and that her presence had challenged that without force. As he spoke, he felt a release, like weight lifting from his chest, and she listened with the same attention she always had. When he finished, she nodded, not with relief but with understanding. She told him that whatever he chose next would be enough, that her role was not to change him, but to offer a moment of clarity, and hearing this made him realize the depth of her respect. The ranch felt different then, not because anything visible had shifted, but because truth now occupied the space between them. The tension that once felt heavy transformed into calm awareness, and though uncertainty remained, it no longer felt threatening. He understood that this was the turning point, not because something dramatic had occurred, but because honesty had entered where silence once ruled. As night settled, they sat quietly, not needing words, sharing the stillness with new understanding, and in that moment the rancher knew his life would not return to what it had been before, because once a person truly sees himself through another's eyes, there is no path back to unawareness, only forward into whatever truth demands next. After that quiet understanding settled between them, the days that followed carried a new emotional weight, not heavy with fear but filled with reflection, and the rancher noticed how the space between them felt honest rather than tense. She continued her work with the same calm focus, yet something had shifted in her eyes, a softness mixed with resolve, and he sensed that her truth had not ended with that conversation. It had only opened the door to something deeper. One evening, as the light faded slowly, she spoke again, this time sharing more of herself without hesitation. She told him about her past shaped by loss and movement, about learning early how to stand strong without depending on permanence, and how strength often meant leaving before attachment could become pain. Her voice remained steady, but emotion lived beneath every word, and the rancher listened with full presence, feeling the weight of her experiences settle into him. He understood that her calm was not absence of feeling but mastery over it, forged through survival. She explained that coming to the ranch had forced her to confront a truth she had avoided, that running from connection had protected her but also limited her, and seeing his guarded heart had reflected her own patterns back to her. She admitted that staying silent would have been easier, yet easier choices rarely lead to growth. Those words resonated deeply with him because they mirrored his own realization. He felt a quiet admiration for her courage, not loud or dramatic, but grounded in honesty as she spoke. He realized that her action was not simply revealing her past but choosing vulnerability in the present, and that choice carried risk for both of them. He felt an urge to reassure her, yet he knew that reassurance without understanding would be empty. Instead, he shared how her presence had shifted his view of solitude, how he once believed isolation equaled safety, but now saw it as a shield that had grown too heavy to carry. His words came slowly but clearly, and with each sentence he felt more aligned with himself. She listened without interrupting, allowing silence to breathe where needed. And in that silence, a mutual respect deepened, not defined by romance or expectation, but by recognition of shared humanity. The ranch itself seemed to respond to this shift. The nights felt warmer, the quiet less sharp, and even the wide land felt less distant. Yet alongside this closeness existed an undercurrent of uncertainty, because both understood that awareness changes paths, and paths demand decisions. She confessed that she did not know how long she would stay, not because she wanted to leave, but because life rarely allows certainty, and hearing this stirred fear within him. Yet he did not retreat. Instead, he acknowledged the truth of impermanence, realizing that connection does not require guarantees to be meaningful. This acceptance marked a turning point, because he chose presence over protection. She noticed this shift and responded not with promises but with gratitude, grateful for honesty without possession. As days passed, their interactions grew more open. Laughter appeared softly, conversations lengthened, and shared moments unfolded naturally, yet neither rushed the process. Understanding that depth grows best without pressure, the rancher felt himself changing in subtle ways, his posture lighter, his thoughts less guarded, and though vulnerability still frightened him, it no longer controlled his choices. She too seemed lighter, more rooted in the present, less defined by the instinct to move on, and together they existed in a space shaped by mutual respect rather than need. One night under the open sky, she spoke about the importance of choosing courage repeatedly, not once, and that insight stayed with him because it framed connection as a practice rather than a single act. He realized then that her greatest gift was not companionship but clarity. She had not come to rescue him or be rescued, but to remind him of his capacity to feel fully. And as that understanding settled, the rancher sensed that whatever future awaited them, whether shared briefly or longer, he was no longer the same man who had once feared silence filled with emotion. He had learned that strength does not come from distance, but from willingness to stand present with uncertainty, and as he looked at her in that quiet moment, he felt gratitude not rooted in expectation but in growth, knowing that even if paths diverged, the truth they had shared would remain part of him, shaping his choices beyond the ranch, beyond the week that had changed everything, and that realization carried both peace and purpose into whatever awaited next. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the rancher and the tall Navajo woman stood side by side, not speaking but sharing a quiet understanding that words could never capture. He realized that her presence had transformed more than the house or the land. It had awakened a part of him he thought lost forever. Her calm strength had shown him that vulnerability was not weakness, that connection even fleeting, could heal the deepest loneliness. She looked at him one last time that evening, her eyes holding stories, courage, and an unspoken promise that life would continue to challenge them both, and in that gaze he felt both an ending and a beginning, knowing that what had passed in that week was a gift beyond measure, a lesson in trust, patience, and the power of being truly seen. As darkness settled softly over the ranch, he took a steady breath, understanding that some people enter your life not to stay forever, but to leave a mark so permanent that your soul carries it always. And in that truth, he found peace, hope, and a quiet, enduring love that would never fade.